Everybody, and welcome back to Why Is This a Podcast? I am your host, Kieran Watts. So lovely for you to join us again. You're in for a treat today. We've got a very, very interesting guest. He's a journalist and the president of the Gambia Press Union. Please welcome to the show my friend and yours, Mr. Sheriff Bojang Jr. Hello, Sheriff.
Hi, Kieran.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Like you've got a storied career and a very, very impressive one at that. I just want to start off before we get into the questions. How are you?
I'm good. I'm in Berlin for a scholarship program, and yeah, I'm enjoying. I love Berlin. I'm enjoying every bit of my stay here.
Because you had COVID.
I did, yes.
And what's the recovery been like? Because I know that there's people get it and they have lasting side effects. Do you have any of those or
no? Well, so I had it in November, December, around Christmas. I was in the UK, and of course, my wife works at a hospital. She's a healthcare worker. So she must have picked it from the hospital and then she brought it to the house. I had it. My daughter had it. And my wife, of course. Theirs was mild. They had mild ones. Mine was a bit serious, much more serious than my wife, because it kept me for 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks. And at some point, I was struggling to breathe. I had all other symptoms like, constant high temperature, muscle pains, loss of smell or taste, food in particular. And then at some point, I had to be rushed to the hospital where I was treated. And then I think another time paramedics, came to the house to look at me to check, and then, and also to advise. But then I think after 2.5, 3 weeks, I was out of the woods. And then since then, I've not had any effect of any kind.
I'm glad that you and your wife and your daughter, I'm glad that you're all feeling better. Really glad. Not just because it meant that you could come on the show, but I'm just very glad that you could.
Yeah.
That you're feeling better. Did it how? Because this is something I wanted to ask people who've had it. How does it change you mentally in terms of how you think of the pandemic? How does it change you in that respect?
So first, I think for me, my courage was that I've not aware of any underlying illness of any sort. My whole life, the only sickness I would have would be malaria. Of course, born in the Gambia and, growing up in the Gambia, is one of the countries prone to malaria. And then, we've always had malaria, but we always knew we would survive it. It wasn't going to kill us. So I had malaria a few times growing up, almost every year, for some years, my whole childhood. But then, scientifically, experts would say it's, your risks are higher or high if have underlying illnesses. So I knew I didn't have, as far as I knew the time, I didn't have any underlying illness. So that was a big morale booster for me. But then also at some point when I was struggling to breathe and I was losing my breath, and even to go upstairs, coming down the stairs, I will take a break on 2 occasions, I will do 3 stairs and then sit down a bit. So I got a bit worried. And then, of course, you also read sometimes about, people who succumb to this virus and they've had no underlying illness, young people like myself. And then, so that was a bit destabilizing. I must confess at some point, I I was worried. My wife was worried. So I was confused, was between this encouragement and inspiration that I didn't have any underlying sickness versus the fact that, we will read about other people with the same situation. I mean, physically fit, healthy, but then they succumb to the virus, or they suffered, enormously from the virus. So it was a bit confusing. And at some point I was concerned, I was worried as to what will happen to me.
Have you been vaccinated yet?
No, not yet. I will be vaccinated on Thursday here in Berlin, and it will be Johnson and Johnson. So we'll see how that goes. In the Gambia, I didn't get vaccinated. I had the opportunity to get vaccinated. I mean, even the first day they launched the vaccine, but I needed to be sure of, I had no issue with the vaccines. I trust the vaccines, entirely, wholeheartedly. I think in the Gambia, I must confess, at the time I was a bit concerned of of the vaccine politics and even the management of it. How am I sure that the country had enough? Because what was being used and what has been used in the Gambia is AstraZeneca. I had to be sure that they had enough, and then the second dose wouldn't be a problem. I had to be enough, sure and certain that the authorities knew what they were doing in terms of administering this vaccine, the whole process. I had a lot of questions in my head. So in a nutshell, I trust the vaccine, but I had concern about the administration of the vaccine. So that's why I deliberately refused to take it in the Gambia. But then I'm glad to say that in Berlin, here in Germany, I'll be vaccinated on Thursday.
So I'll be vaccinated myself this week as well on Wednesday, June 2nd. So the day before you, I think. You said
Yeah.
So let's take this moment, yourself as somebody who had COVID and thankfully survived, and myself who has not had it, at least to the best of my knowledge, to just encourage people to get the vaccine. Let's take that moment.
Get the vaccine and encourage your families and friends and associates and everybody you know to take the vaccine. We are safer with the vaccine. We are less vulnerable with the vaccine, and the world is safer with the vaccine. And with vaccines, we can return to normalcy. We can meet our friends, travel around, hug each other, and embrace each other once again and live happy life. And I would always say it's like prayer. What do you have to lose?
I want to come back. I'll come back to the vaccines in just a while, but I want to sort of talk more about you and your career. As I mentioned when I introduced you, you've got a storied career. You've got a very sort of illustrious resume. For a young man like you are. So journalism is what I wanted to come to sort of first there. Basically, I like to ask this question of people: is what inspired you to enter journalism in the first place? Was that sort of your obvious career path? Was it something you fell into by accident? What inspired you to get into the game?
So it's interesting. Growing up, when I was a kid, the Gambia, in terms of even having a daily newspaper in the Gambia, there was no daily newspaper in the Gambia. I knew very few journalists. If I knew anybody at all, I wasn't interested until 1992, when Daily Observer newspaper, a private newspaper, a Liberian, a great Liberian journalist, fled Liberia, fled from the war in Liberia, and then came to Gambia as a refugee and came with Daily Observer, the concept of Daily Observer, to launch it in the Gambia, to continue it in the Gambia, because it was impossible in Liberia. So when he came to Gambia,
did they flee Liberia at the time of Charles Taylor?
Yeah, it was actually Charles Taylor. He ran away from Charles Taylor because even Daily Observer newspaper in Liberia at the time got burnt. There was arson attack. And then, it was unbearable for him. His life wasn't safe. So he fled to Gambia with his family. One thing led to the other. And then he launched the Daily Observer newspaper, the first daily newspaper in the Gambia. It was, a lot of people thought it was impossible. The country was too small. There would not be enough news for a daily newspaper. People didn't have money. They wouldn't afford to buy a newspaper every day. And thirdly, some would tell him that the country is too small and people are so interrelated. Everybody is related to everybody. If you touch one person, you touch the other person. So daily news wasn't possible. But he set up Daily Observer newspaper. And among the first people that he recruited was my brother, who has the same name as me. He's also Sheriff Bojang, senior, and that's why I'm junior. He recruited Sheriff and young people. They are in their early 20s. He recruited them from high school, trained them. Because he said he needed writers, those with literary talents. He was not looking for journalists, and then he could train them into journalism. Let's say 5 years into Sheriff's career at Daily Observer, my other brother, same mother and father, my elder brother called Pamodu, also started working at Daily Observer. And I knew at the time when I was growing up, I didn't have role models. I mean, in terms of looking at people to envy them, in the Gambia, everybody, you look out for people who were popular and things like that. So I saw how people, ministers, people that everybody struggled to get to know or to even meet or to speak to, how they were embracing people like Sheriff and Pamodo, how they wanted to be friends with them. I would pass the streets, and I will hear people talking about how great Sheriff's article on that particular day was. They were talking about his talents and everybody wanted to be friends with him. Then I think that was a moment I thought, okay, I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. I knew Sheriff was a writer. I didn't know the difference technically. I mean, what was it like to be a journalist? But I knew what a writer was because my brothers were writers. Then that's how I started thinking about, whoa, I want to be like them. I didn't think twice. I didn't think of anything. So from there, I put my entire life into writing. And I think I will read a lot of everything that they were writing, like, I was obsessed with their writing. Then I got to know other writers, young writers at Daily Observer at the time, and I would read their writings as well. And eventually my style of writing became a combination of all these people I was writing. Like there will be a lot of big words, a lot of, literature, a lot of, let's say, amateur Shakespeare in my writings, and things like that, where you can explain things in plain, simple English. I mean, I will choose the difficult option for the reader and then things like that. But that's how I got into writing. I would write opinion. Everybody could write opinion letters. Then I will write opinion letters about social issues, about abortion, about female genital mutilation, about politics, about everything. And I will send it to Daily Observer. It was free. They will just publish it on the opinion page. From there, I graduated into writing for a column on Daily Observer called Young Observer, where they were giving opportunity to young talents or promising writers or people with passion to write. You write fiction. So I was writing a lot of love stories, a lot of love romantic stories, imaginations and things like that, things I never experienced, but I thought they are possible, they were doable. I would write about them. And then people started recognizing me. And that's how I got my first opportunity to write a news article. Then I will write from schools because I was still in school, secondary school, and I will write about school debates in school, all the activities in school. I'm in my school and schools across the country. And from there, before I knew it, by the time I did my grade 12, senior secondary examination, I was a regular writer, news and current affairs writer, Daily Observer. And right after school, before even my results came out, I was employed as a staff reporter, and I rose through the ranks to become sub-editor. And then, I was, double columnist. And the rest is history. And many years down the line, I went into broadcast journalism and then ended up working for, a whole bunch of international media covering Africa, covering West Africa, and, interviewing presidents, all other people across the world. That's my story as a journalist.
It's a fascinating story. I mean, I always knew that I wanted to write. that from sort of a young age, writing, I was terrible at maths, not great at science. I was always more inclined towards the humanities, history, things like that. I was always more inclined to that. It was this that I never envisioned myself doing. I've never envisioned myself actually doing sort of interviews, but here we are,
Mm.
and I really enjoy doing them. And I want to come back to something that you've said there, and which I just touched on in terms of interviewing. You've interviewed a wide range of individuals. You've interviewed, correct me if I'm wrong, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad.
Yeah, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Yes, I
For,
did
for
an interview with him when he was Iranian president in Dakar because he was traveling. It was his famous three-nation tour. He said those are the countries that were going to change the world, and they were the Gambia, Senegal, and Brazil. And I remember one of my questions to him was, how Gambia and Senegal, Gambia in particular, was going to change the world because there was brutal dictatorship in the Gambia. How was Gambia going to change the world? Or it was just another politics, trying to gain control of countries. In the midst of, world politics and scramble for Africa and stuff. But it was a very, very, very fearful kind of environment. It was at the presidency of Senegal. The Senegalese president was standing next to him. Ahmadinejad, I was surprised, a very, very little tiny man, very, very tiny. But then, of course, surrounded by some of the biggest in terms of like muscles, height, and these are the biggest, like these huge people, very, very tall. Everybody is 6 something, really huge. Those were his bodyguards, and they were all surrounding him, all in black and white, black suits and white shirts, And I will always remember that moment because Ahmadinejad was a very, very, controversial figure. Was very, he doesn't mince his words. As a leader, he would say things. And of course, there was a lot of issues between Iran at the time. Of course, every time, but at the time, and the Western powers. So, there was a lot of things going on. And of Africa, Gambia and Senegal embraced Ahmadinejad because at that time, it wasn't even his first time to go to Gambia. I remember there was an AU, African Union summit or conference in the Gambia, and the president at the time invited him as a special guest. And a lot of African countries at the time were warming up to Iran.
You've interviewed heads of state, you've interviewed royalty. As somebody who's sort of doing interviews myself like this, what's your thought process when you're interviewing these high-level people, these powerful men and women?
It depends on who you interview and how much time you have in preparing for that interview, and also how cooperative the team, of that particular person. I've interviewed presidents where I had perhaps a week or days to prepare, and I knew they were coming. And of course, I had, sometimes they will ask for questions, or sometimes they will merely ask for areas. When they ask for questions in advance, I hate it. I'm not sure of any journalists who like this, because then they made sure they allocate time to you based on the questions you send, and you have to stick to those questions. And when you are sending those questions in advance, the concern in your head is that if you include any critical question that is going to put that particular person, president or so, on the spot, they might turn down your request for the interview and stuff. So you make sure. Oftentimes it happens to me, I'll put questions there most of the time that I know they want to answer, but then hoping that if they answer this question happily, you can have your rebound and then ask for questions that you wanted to ask. The example is that I'll give two examples. One was Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf at the time. When I interviewed her, I had to send in my questions. And when I was given, I think, 3 minutes to interview her. It wasn't enough. My type of interview, it would, I mean, 3 minutes is not even enough for even 2 questions. But then it was 3 minutes because she had busy schedule. I remember the day I was there, even after me, a president was coming to see her at the presidential suite at this fancy hotel in Dakar, Senegal. And it was really depressing that I couldn't ask all what I wanted to ask. So that was problematic. Another problematic interview would be not with the president, but the current Queen of the Netherlands when she was Princess Maxima. I was working for Radio Netherlands, and Radio Netherlands assigned me to interview Princess Maxima because at the time she was princess. She came to Dakar for her project on, I think it was microfinance project. And then she came to Dakar. She was a champion of that. And when I went to interview, I was asked, I had to channel that through the Dutch embassy in Dakar, and they asked me to send in my questions. I think it was, but they told me there was not much time, she was behind schedule. I think I sent 4 or 5 questions, of course, not controversial. And when they got the question, they, scheduled interview the time. So I had all the time to prepare for that. I think it was 3 days in advance. But when I went to the hotel where she was, I went to the suite to meet her. I was met at the door by the Dutch ambassador at the time. He came, he told me, I'm gonna tell you the procedure today. The princess got your questions, she answered them. It was for radio, but she answered means she wrote down the answers and they've typed them. And they had the print say, we're going to give you the printout. When you go in there, you go in, you take a photo of her, for your piece, and then we hand over the printed answers to you, and then you leave. Then I was like, oh, Miss Ambassador, but I had my recorder and my microphone and my headphone. I say, but this is for radio. He said, no, it's behind schedule. So what I had to do, of course, the written answer didn't work for me. This was for radio. Immediately, I entered there. Very charming woman. I remember I promised my producer, my editor at the Radio Netherlands, that because she was charming, I was going to wear my best suit. So I did my best. It turned out years later that it was a terrible one, but I wore my best suit, and then I went in there all dressed up, And when I got there, and then said, oh, pleasantries, nice to meet you. And so, where you from? Gambia, but I'm in Dakar. But I said, Your Highness, I'm so sorry. I think there was misunderstanding. I work for Radio Netherlands. The radio, this was supposed to be for radio, but they gave me a printout of your answers and it doesn't work for me. So I don't know what you can do. He said, oh, you work for radio? I said, no, I didn't know that. They didn't tell me. Come on, sit down, do your interview, take your time. You can ask your questions and I will record. Yeah, and she turned to the team and the ambassador and say, that's right? And they say, yeah, of course, they were not going to say no to princess. And then say, yeah. Then I sat down to do the interview and the record. I had to ask other questions that were not because they asked me to ask any question. So I ended up having more than the minutes that was allocated to me. But finally, I think sometimes interview, what you plan, you can have all the time in the world to plan, but the day of the interview, when you sit face to face with the interviewee, everything can go wrong or can change. Former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo, one of the most controversial and difficult, leaders you can find in Africa. Obasanjo is Obasanjo. He doesn't mince his words. He is controversial inside out. When I went to meet him, he came to Dakar for a meeting. It's called the Elders, the Council of Elders Africa. Him, Kofi Annan was there, Liberian president at the time, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a lot of them. And they came to Dakar to talk about, to find solution, find solution to the drug trafficking using Guinea-Bissau in particular as a transit point for Latin American cocaine, that go through West Africa to the European market. So they came to find solution. And as far as Obasanjo was concerned, the interview that he was going to hold throughout that time was about that, was about the cocaine and everything. There, what he was in Dakar for. When I sent email to his minders and then they arranged everything, of course, I don't think they didn't ask for my questions. I think they expected that it would be, But this was not my concern. This meeting at that time, it coincided with because Obasanjo's own party in Nigeria, then they had I think there was some controversy because he had beef with the president at the time, who was Goodluck Jonathan, because Goodluck Jonathan was his protege, but then they had an issue at the time. So my concern, my interest was that to talk to him about that. So when my first question was wrong because it wasn't about drugs. So when I asked him my first question about his relationship with the president, and there was I can't remember, but there were some wild rumors about stuff, and I put those rumors to him, and and then he reacted very angrily. Of course, he wasn't expecting that, but he didn't want that question. But more so, he wasn't expecting that question. He wanted to be asked what he was there in Dakar to do. Then the second question too was linked to Nigeria, his relationship with the president. And he told me to get up. He said, I don't want to talk to you again. Go, leave, go. And I didn't have the interview. Then he kicked me out because he was offended that I was asking. So these things happen. I had a lot of good, bad, really weird, terrible experiences, but these are some of them. But then how you prepare and what you ask depend on some of these issues.
They're learning moments as well.
Oh yeah, you learn from this. You learn from all this. Yeah, I mean these are all learning, curves for you.
I want to sort of go back to COVID, and I want to go to COVID-19 in Africa, because as we said, you actually did contract COVID-19, but while you were in the UK. But the COVID-19 situation in Africa is sort of at the forefront of people's minds in a certain way because of the lack of access to vaccines in the region. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, how is COVID playing out in Africa from your perspective? And what are your thoughts on this vaccine inequity that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think from this, at some point, from the beginning of this outbreak, the COVID, the pandemic, doomsayers, pundits, experts, everybody in every part of the world was expecting that this will be perhaps almost the end of Africa as we know it. COVID was going to cause havoc in Africa. Some will even predict millions might die in Africa, might do this, because of course, for the obvious reasons. First, there will always be the issue of, disbelief, the issue of Africa seen as, every dirt is going to end up there, is going to go there, is going to end up. That was a lot of prejudice, of course, but also scientifically because of the fact that the healthcare systems in most of African countries, especially West Africa, a lot of West African countries, healthcare systems were poor. People didn't have access to even the basic tablets, such as paracetamol, ibuprofen, aspirin, etc. And also you look at some of the places, rural parts of Africa, some of them were cut off from anything that has to do with healthcare provision. People are pregnant, sometimes you give birth at home. Most of the time in rural settings, you can't even access hospitals in nearest towns or cities, of course. But then I think what happened in Africa throughout this, there were concerns, of course, but there was a lot of resilience, because I often say sometimes it's not the sickness itself or the pandemic, like you contracting it, but the fear of contracting is the paranoia can cause a lot of problem, can cause other damages, in your system. Africa, there was a lot of resistance, there was a lot of resilience. And what actually fascinates me the most, or what I was kind of thankful for, African leaders and leadership often don't have praises. People don't praise them, because of the obvious reasons. They're always doing the wrong things most of the time. But this time, I'm not sure if you're going to ask that later, but then I think in West Africa, in particular, the Ebola outbreak that I had the opportunity of covering, throughout, and physically be present in Sierra Leone and Liberia and Guinea, that helped. We talk about in this pandemic, social distancing, washing of hands, and all this hygiene. That was already there before the Ebola outbreak. These were problems in the countries worst affected: Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea Conakry. But then came Ebola. By the time Ebola pandemic was over in West Africa, washing of hands with soap, social distancing when there was need for it, and things like that became part of people's lives and cultures. People lost thousands and thousands of people, and these are the things that they did in order to do away with Ebola. When COVID came, the message, so a lot of African countries, especially these countries that went through Ebola, they didn't have to reinvent the message or the strategy. It became a continuation, reminding people, remember, we had Ebola once upon a time. This is what we did to beat it. This sickness is the same thing. This pandemic, do the same. We will beat it. We will stop it from coming here. If it came, we would beat it and stuff. And this is what happened. Before it even came, there was pandemonium, there was concern, there was fear, but people knew what they had to do. Leaders knew what they had to do with limited resources, with weak healthcare systems. Even after Ebola, COVID, they knew what they had to do in terms of sensitization, in terms of messaging, in terms of checking their borders and putting stringent measures. So for once, most African countries were ahead of the pandemic, and this helped. Of course, we've seen places like South Africa where it caused a lot of destruction, but it could have been worse in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in Guinea, in Gambia, in Guinea-Bissau, and a lot of other countries. But the message and people's attitude during Ebola helped to minimize the damage of the COVID pandemic in these countries.
That's an interesting take. In a certain sense, it's almost as though you were both the least and best prepared for this kind of outbreak, given your experience of Ebola, but as you mentioned, sort of the weaknesses in the health systems. And you were right. I was going to ask you about your Ebola coverage, but I think you just addressed that quite well. But I do just want to sort of throw it out there that for your Ebola coverage, you were a finalist for the 2015 CNN African Journalist of the Year Award. I just wanted people to know that, because I think it's important that you receive the credit that you're due for the incredible work that you do, and indeed the incredible work of the press as a whole. And I want to just sort of, before I let you go, come to the role of the press. And I want to just ask you what your thoughts are, A, on the role of the press during a health crisis like this, and also how you effectively address misinformation.
I will first start with misinformation and disinformation, fake news, all that surrounding COVID. Of course, Africa was also affected. Oftentimes, even African media, you see fake news, misinformation, disinformation, and then before you know it, a mainstream media picked it up. Sometimes it will be a respected media will pick it up by error, sometimes blunders, and put it out. In a continent where people consume everything from the media and believe in what they see in the media, And this belief in anything that they don't see in the media, it was dangerous that this disinformation, misinformation, fake news was circulating. But then there were mechanisms put together, in Africa to dispel, like everywhere else. There's no way you can stop this disinformation, fake news, but you can do something about them when they are out there. And of course, continental-wide, you have a project called Africa Check, which is all over Africa. Journalists, fact checkers, experts come together as staff whose job day and night is to check everything all over the internet and even offline. If there is any fake news, misinformation, disinformation, they quickly put it out to say, no, this is what you heard, this is what you watched, this is what you listened to, this is what you read, but no, this is not true, this is the truth. So they give you the two options, the one you read, you watched, you listened to, which was fake news or misinformation, and they provide you with the truth. This is the truth. We've seen that especially during this pandemic, there was a huge rise in popularity of Africa Check, that particular project. They work day and night. Some countries, especially, I will take an example of Ghana, which did not even just rely on Africa Check as a continent-wide project to dispelling fake news, misinformation, disinformation, but they came up with their own project called Fact Check Ghana, where every day, a group of committed, dedicated people who go all over throughout the internet, everywhere, to say this is misinformation, disinformation, fake news, this is the truth. So this helped, because even to be aware that there is something called Fact Check Ghana or Africa Check, this is a victory of itself, because then you know that whatever you see and you have a bit of doubt, you can go there and you know that they will provide you with the option. The role of journalists all over Africa, in West Africa in particular, because this is my area, this is where I'm based, journalists, for once, stop being journalists. I mean, in terms of following ethical issues and stuff, because if you follow the ethics, if we follow the ethical standards of journalism, the issue of impartiality, if John comes and say COVID is real, you have to be, you have to pay attention to this, you have to exercise all the precautionary measures and everything. And then Charles on the other side comes and say, no, it's not real. Oftentimes you have to balance it. You have to say this. You cannot neglect a section of the society that feel or think, even if it is fake and stuff, and assume that there is nothing as fake. It is all, politics, or it's an attempt to kill the African population or Chinese population, or it's for economic reasons, or blah, blah, blah. But then for West African journalists in particular, that they said, the no-sayers, they were not getting coverage. Journalists were focusing on things that will save lives, that will convince and inspire people to go take the vaccine, to exercise, social distancing, to wash their hands, any other thing that challenge those processes. The media deliberately ignore that and will treat it as madness. And this helped, because if the same media that the population relies solely and so much on is telling them on Monday that wash your hands, COVID is real, if you don't do it, might kill, or we stand at losing our loved one, and then Tuesday they feature somebody, a so-called expert, who would say, it's not real, it's all fake. It's something that was concocted in some lab, as we've seen with the Cameroonian doctor in the US and a bunch of doctors who are linked to Trump, to come there and say that they be given platform, an opportunity to confuse people. In West Africa, journalists stop this lightly. They refuse to be carried away by this. They refuse to give them prominence or publicity. So this was a big achievement for Africa, West Africa in particular, in the fight to control COVID, to minimize the damage, and to fight COVID.
Sheriff, it's been an absolute privilege, absolute delight to interview you. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you come back in the future.
Sure.
I hope you enjoy Berlin. I'm so glad that you and your wife and daughter are recovered from COVID. Good luck with the vaccination, and also give my best to your little boy.
Thank you very much, Kerian, and pleasure talking to you.
What's his name? Remind me.
Rahim.
Rahim.
Yeah, he's in the Gambia, so his wife arrived in the Gambia last night, so she'll be there for a week, and then she will take him back to Leeds.
We'll give my love to Rahim and your lovely family.
All right. Thank you.
And thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Sheriff Bojang Jr. is the president of the Gambia Press Union. Sheriff Bojang Jr., everybody. This has been Why Is This a Podcast? I'm Kieran Watts. Stay safe, wear a mask, get vaccinated when it's your turn, and join us next time. Please subscribe, and stay safe. We love you.